Book 3 of the Odyssey is called King Nestor Remembers. This is a quiet chapter. There are no monsters here, no battles, no clever escapes. Telemachus arrives in the city of Pylos, where he is simply welcomed. At first glance, very little seems to happen. After dealing with those nasty suitors infesting his house and pestering his mother, it's a bit of a relief. For the first time in the epic, Telemachus meets someone who remembers the Trojan War, not as legend, but as lived experience. King Nestor was a comrade of Odysseus, and so he's able to answer at least some of Telemachus's questions. He tells stories, and those stories carry lessons. Through this storytelling, we see in this chapter a new kind of literary structure. Instead of moving steadily through, the narrative pauses to look back. We hear about past events, including about the betrayal of Agamemnon and how his son Orestes responds. So we can see how hearing these stories will shape how Telemachus understands his own situation. At the same time, Telemachus is no longer being carried along by the gods. Although Athena is still present, disguised as mentor, her guidance looks different. She leads Telemachus into situations where he can observe how honorable adults behave, and then she steps back. As we read Book 3, we'll pay close attention to how stories from the past function in the present. We'll see how memory becomes instruction, and how listening carefully can be a form of growth. We've already started talking about the impact of Telemachus and Nestor meeting, but before we do any more analyzing of this chapter, let's nail down an objective summary of what happens. Now, I usually say this should be chronological, but this chapter works a little differently because of the story within the story. We'll just note carefully which parts took place earlier. Telemachus and Athena, in her mentor disguise, arrive in Pylos, where they find the people performing an elaborate sacrifice to Poseidon. Telemachus hesitates at first, uncertain how to approach a king, but Athena encourages him to speak confidently. King Nestor welcomes them warmly. Telemachus introduces himself and asks whether Nestor has any news of his father, Odysseus. In response, Nestor begins to recount events from the end of the Trojan War. So this part happened in the past, say about 10 years ago. He explains how the Greek leaders quarreled after the fall of Troy, and how their forces divided. Some returned home quickly, while others delayed. The groups were split again and again, which is why Nestor can't tell Telemachus about what finally happened to Odysseus. But he does describe the fate of Agamemnon, who was murdered upon his return by 𝙫𝙫𝙫. With the help of his wife, Clytemnestra, Nestor then tells how Agamemnon's son, Orestes, later avenged his father by killing 𝙫𝙫𝙫. Now, back to present day. After finishing his story, Nestor advises Telemachus to be brave and consider the example of Orestes. He suggests that Telemachus continue his journey to Sparta, where King Menelaus may have more information about Odysseus. That evening, Telemachus participates in a feast and observes the proper rituals of hospitality. Athena reveals herself briefly in divine form before departing. King Nestor is amazed and pledges another impressive offering in her honor. The next day, Nestor sends his son, Pisistratus, to accompany Telemachus to Sparta, and Book 3 ends with Telemachus setting out again, this time by chariot, continuing his search for news of his father. Now that we've traced what happens, we can turn to how this chapter is built. Book 3 introduces a structural feature that will become increasingly important in the Odyssey. a story told within the larger story. The present action follows Telemachus in Pylos, but in the middle of that story, the narrative pauses so that Nestor can recount events from the past. This is sometimes called an embedded narrative, a story placed inside another story. Why did Homer make this structural choice? Nestor's account is not random background information. It shapes how both Telemachus and the reader understand what might happen next. The story of Agamemnon's murder and Orestes' revenge becomes a kind of example, a model of how a son might respond when his father's household is threatened. So Homer lets us see Telemachus figuring things out. He's surrounded by older and wiser people who could advise him, even a goddess. But instead of directly instructing Telemachus how to act, the poem places him in a situation where he must listen and remember and compare. The past becomes a guide for interpreting the present. As we move into close reading, we'll pay special attention to what Nestor says, and why is this story told here at this moment, and how it changes the direction of Telemachus' journey. So let's slow down and listen carefully to Nestor. This is not the voice of a young man trying to prove himself. This is someone who has survived war, division, and long years of reflection. Nestor does not rush his story. He speaks with the weight of memory. Notice first what he chooses to emphasize. He describes a long-fought war of attrition. 9 years we wove a web of disaster for those Trojans, pressing them hard with every tactic known to man. This language is metaphorical. He doesn't literally mean they were weaving, although that might remind you of Penelope. This has the effect of us picturing how a spider has to toil carefully for hours to weave its web just to stay alive. Although he does mention how cunning Odysseus was, Nestor does not dwell on heroic battle scenes or personal glory. Instead, he recounts quarrels amongst the Greek leaders after Troy fell. The army divided, loyalties shifted. Some returned home quickly, others delayed. The aftermath of victory was disorder. Then Nestor turns to Agamemnon. Agamemnon returns home from war only to be murdered by 𝙫𝙫 with the help of Clytemnestra. His household, left vulnerable during his long absence, collapses into betrayal. And then comes Orestes. Orestes does not remain passive. He waits for his moment and eventually avenges his father by killing 𝙫𝙫. Nestor praises him openly. His name is spoken with admiration. Homer has placed Telemachus in the position of listening to this story at exactly the right moment and really hearing it and internalizing it, especially because Nestor is a king. We know that Telemachus must be patient and listen politely and give him his full attention. The parallels are difficult to miss. A father long absent from home, a household under threat, a mother surrounded by dangerous men, a son coming of age. And yet, Nestor never directly commands Telemachus to act like Orestes. He does not say, "You must take revenge." Instead, he chooses this story out of all the stories he could tell and allows the comparison to take shape on its own. This is how embedded narrative works. The past becomes a mirror. Telemachus must decide for himself how closely his own situation resembles the one he has just heard described. For us as readers, this structure creates tension. We begin to wonder, will Telemachus become another Orestes? Or will his story unfold differently? Through Nestor's memory, Homer has just raised the stakes of the present. Now here's an example of how close reading, going back over a section, can make things jump out at you the second time. After Nestor's story, it becomes much more clear what Athena is doing in Book 3. Because the first time through, you might say, she doesn't say much, and then just flies off. She is still guiding Telemachus, but her guidance looks different than it did in Ithaca. Athena does not solve the problem for him. She places him in the right environment and helps him behave correctly within it. And she does this well disguised as mentor. When Homer wrote the Odyssey, that was just a character name. The word mentor will eventually come to mean a trusted guide, someone who helps a younger person grow into responsibility. From this book, exactly, is where we get this word. In the Odyssey, that guidance or mentorship happens not through commands, but through modeling and experience. Notice what Telemachus is learning in Pylos. He watches how a community honors the gods through ritual. Even Athena demonstrates how to pray to Poseidon. He watches how a king welcomes guests. He watches how elders speak in public. He watches the order of the feast, who speaks first, and who offers generosity, how respect is shown. None of this is explained to him as a lecture. He learns it by observing. This is another form of education, apprenticeship. Telemachus begins the chapter hesitant and uncertain. He needs Athena's encouragement, even to approach Nestor. But by the end of Book 3, Telemachus is moving differently through the world. He is received as a legitimate guest. He speaks and represents his family with more confidence. Notice the change in epithets that are attached to his name. In this book, we hear brave Telemachus and wise Telemachus. Athena's mentorship has done its work. She didn't make any decisions for him. She strengthened his judgment. By the time Telemachus leaves Pylos for Sparta, he doesn't have a goddess governess anymore. He's a young man standing on his own to represent his family's interests. In what is becoming a familiar refrain, we can say by the end of Book 3, still nothing has been fully resolved. Odysseus is still missing. The suitors still occupy Ithaca. Telemachus still does not know where his father is. But in this chapter, Telemachus has learned a lot. He discovers that older men's stories are not just a chance for them to boast about their glory days in the past. They're also tools for understanding the present. Through Nestor's memory, he hears what can happen when a household is left vulnerable. He sees what it means for a son to act decisively, but not precipitously. Orestes doesn't rush in, he takes his time. So Telemachus is also shown how events unfold over time, and that patience and timing matter. At the same time, he's learned by watching. He's observed how a king behaves. He has witnessed ritual and order. He's experienced hospitality that contrasts sharply with the disorder in Ithaca. The events of Book 3 teach him, and us, that growth doesn't always come from dramatic action. It can be more about understanding, maturation. And this can come from listening carefully, comparing stories, and paying attention to how honorable people conduct themselves. The structure of the chapter reinforces this lesson. The narrative pauses to look backwards, and in doing so, it prepares the way forward. Memory becomes instruction. The past becomes a mirror. Telemachus leaves Pylos not with answers, but with perspective. To continue working through this quiet chapter in more detail, we have a reader's guide for you. Find the link below. You'll have a chance to think more carefully about these ideas of memory and how observing the lives of others can shape your own choices. These reader's guides we've made for the Odyssey will build your vocabulary, they will guide your close reading practice, and provide you with writing prompts to build those skills. This is why we say with Socratica, you learn more. But we can't do this part for you. I'm channeling my inner Athena here and offering you some mentorship. Spend some time with the Reader's Guide. Get the full learning experience. When you're ready, we'll take the road to Sparta.